Well, thank you very much for inviting me to do a quick session at the start of this afternoon. It's been really great to be invited, and this is ridden off the back of some of the presentations I've been giving to some arts organisations who've been involved in the space, particularly to them about finding the way through the minefield of rights when they start wanting to use BBC archive, which it is a real maze. I'm going to, not knowing kind of the knowledge in this room, and I'm aware that some of you are very, very qualified, in fact far more qualified than I am in terms of academic qualifications about rights and intellectual property, but I'm not sure whether some of you are coming at this kind of from a basic level. So forgive me, I am going to kind of go through just very briefly the kind of basics. I'm going to tell you a bit about, kind of to kick off, what our department does at the BBC and the scale of it. And then come on to specific types of the ways we contract copyright holders and performers, etc., the different models. And then I'm going to go into kind of practical advice about what you will be faced with from a rights point of view when do you want to use existing content. And hopefully give some guidance and practical tips at the end. So that's where I'm coming from. Just a quick note, as this is being filmed and it's going to be online, and you're probably all, some of you are tweeting, etc., I'm necessarily going to have to be quite careful with what I say sometimes. If I am going to be around this afternoon, and what I'm more than happy to for you to come up to me and ask me questions, or if you've got specific queries or you want a bit of advice, that's absolutely fine. I don't mind you coming up to me afterwards. So that's point one. Generally, rights as a subject and intellectual property has come right up the political agenda. And not only politically, but economically, the government have been looking at this in terms of how to boost the UK's creative economy, how we can support creative economy better, how we can make it easier to use rights, etc. And I'm sure some of you are aware of those movements and initiatives and consultations that are going on as we speak. As creative content producers, however, though, we all need to engage with our audience better. We've got to deliver our broadcasts, our recordings, our books, our artworks, our pieces of music to an audience in exactly the way they want it, on whatever platform they want it, and when they want it. It's no longer good enough to be in the old analog world where we just do one performance or we do one broadcast and then it just gathers dust for the rest of time. Those days have long gone, and I think we all need to embrace that challenge. That also forces us to engage with rights and rights holders. And in that respect, we all need to act responsibly, fairly, and also innovatively. We need to think about innovative new models. And we need to find a way of delivering our content, our great content, legally. That's the most important thing. So, as I said, I'm just going to spend about 20 minutes covering a bit about what we do and come on to some practical advice at the end. Okay. So, I work in a department called Talent and Rights Negotiation Group in the BBC. We're part of BBC Vision, but we undertake rights work and clearances and assessments across the whole of the BBC, so it's audio, music, online as well. We negotiate the agreements for in-house productions. We commission independent productions. We often deal with sports rights and cover clear rights for news programming. And we also acquire the rights to use feature films and acquired series for the BBC to broadcast. So there's a huge gamut of activity that we do. Just a quick reminder of how rights are at the heart of everything we do at the BBC. We are a creator. We invest over £2 billion on in the creative economy in the UK every year from our license fee. We buy intellectual property, and we also sell our intellectual property through BBC Worldwide, our commercial arm, all around the world in various platforms, not only broadcast, but online and digital space as well. And we always have to remember the tricky balance here between the public service and the commercial arenas. We also need to remember our changing audience needs, and I've mentioned that before. Transformative technology, this public service commercial balance, and not forgetting the intense competition that's out there now, not just for us as a broadcaster, but generally speaking, there's a lot more players in the market now, and there's some big, wealthy online players as well. Whether that's Google or Apple, they're all vying to get into this market, to buy content, to buy intellectual property rights, sometimes exclusively, so that they can dominate or try and dominate the market. Value for money, we've always got that at the BBC in terms of delivering better value back to the license fee payer, and continuous improvement. We have challenges. We've got the regulatory challenges. We've got fragmentation of the audience. They're all, eyeballs and ears are going everywhere now. We've got audiences who want to own, store, use, and share their content. And we've got increased rights awareness, not only by the public. You just see the recent sports deals for the Premier League and how much money is being paid for those rights. That gets into the newspapers now, and generally people are aware of rights and the cost of rights. But lastly, we do have opportunities, and certainly at the BBC, as I said, we invest a lot of money into the creative economy of the UK. We have a global brand. We can use Worldwide very effectively for rights holders and artists and key talent around the globe to develop them. It's a great showcase, and also we've got multimedia quality on all platforms. So, just some figures, it's just demonstrating the scale of what we have to deal with. We issue over 300,000 contracts a year at the BBC for contributors and rights clearances. We have 600,000 rights payments or contributor payments every year, 200,000 items of music every week are reported to the music collecting societies, thankfully not manually. And we have over 200 staff in Rights and Business Affairs as a whole, and that's shrinking, by the way. That seems a lot of money. It seems a lot of money and people, but it's actually not a lot when you look at the scale of what we do. Now, I've mentioned before that transformative technology, often the BBC is at the forefront of developing that technology, and I spend a lot of my days talking to people in future media and research and development about what's coming up, always trying to keep ahead of the game and to see what the rights challenges are that are coming up. And just to demonstrate this as a quick example, new technologies such as the iPlayer do pose us very complex rights challenges in clearing material, and particularly archive material. It took us about 8 years to negotiate the rights for iPlayer. I personally spent 3 years of my life working on iPlayer, getting that ready. So I was there, and I know the pain we went through to get that, but we did it, and we got there. We reached 70 new agreements, and even now, 5 years later, to the day pretty much, we still have some issues with certain rights holders. So it's not a complete 100% success rate. And that's after 8 years or more. Just a quick, scary slide, disclaimer, just to mention that unlike Anthony, I'm not a lawyer. I know where to find very good ones. But what I am is a negotiator, and I'm obviously experienced about rights. But just to say that whatever I say today shouldn't be taken as kind of formal legal advice, and you should go and get professional legal advice where you can about rights. So, quick piece.
More expensive lawyers are available.
More expensive lawyers are available, quite, exactly. Far more per hour than I get to charge. So, quickly, forgive me for those of you who know this, but I just wanted to get us all up to the basics. What is copyright? So, in a couple of slides, what is it? Well, it's the legal protection given to the creator or the author of an original literary, dramatic, artistic or musical work, or other works such as sound, film, broadcasts, and typographical arrangements can also be protected by copyright. That gives that creator control over when and how copies are made of that work. And it is granted automatically when that work is created. You don't have to register it. But it has to be substantial, so a work of the brow, as it's called. And it also has to be in material form. So you can't, going down the pub and thinking up a great idea to tell all my friends, that's not a copyright work. You have to have a material form. You have to write it down or draw it or bring it alive. Rights holders are protected with something called moral rights, which enables them to also assert those rights. So to be identified as the author of that work or the creator of the work, that's the paternity right. The integrity right, so not allowing your work to be adapted, modified, altered, bastardized, mixed, edited, you name it. Some people want to do it. And you can, you don't have to assert that right. That's yours already. And lastly, the privacy right. That's more to do where you're commissioning a photographer, for example, and you want to use those photographs that you've commissioned privately for your own domestic and private uses. So, copyrights aren't trademarks. There's a subtle difference, and trademarks are more about commercial protection of a symbol or brand. There's lots of commercial examples of that. Copyrights have different durations, usually 70 years from the end of the year of the death of the author or creator, or 50 years from the first publication or release in some instances. Some things like Crown copyright, I believe, are 125 years. So that was when I last looked. So there's a difference between assignments and licenses, and you can assign your copyright, your complete copyright or your part of your copyright, to somebody else. Or you can license it bit by bit to different users, and you can offer exclusive licenses or non-exclusive licenses. So you can either sell to one person or license to one person, or you can sell to everybody. And obviously the values of those licenses will vary depending on how exclusive they are. There are some exceptions to copyright where you can use copyright works freely without clearance or permission. A couple of those are what we call fair dealing, where you can use a fair amount of the work, of the complete work, for criticism and review purposes. But we always say to program makers, that's got to be genuine criticism and review, not this is my top 10 favorite pieces of art. It's got to be a proper critique of the work and the author. We also sometimes use the insubstantial argument that something is not substantial of the whole work, but that's quite a subjective area, and we try not to use that. Interestingly, we should also make the point that just because it's online, it doesn't mean it's free to use. And I'm sure a lot of you in this room know this already, but just to make the point that some people still are out there who believe that because it's up online, it's okay to use and copy and right-click and copy. So we have literary works, including all of those. We have musical works, both the mechanical, the sound recording itself, or the commercial sound recordings. So if you use a CD in your installation or gallery, etc. You have the underlying musical composition, and you also have grand rights, which are quite complex. It's more to do with dramatico-musical works, such as operas, musicals, and ballets. Artistic works. Interestingly there, you've also got, as well as the original artworks or photograph, you have the transparency. So somebody taking a photograph of an artwork, they own the transparency, that copyright. And also architectural plans, etc., are copyright protected. And performers, actors, singers, musicians, and including stuntmen. who are also on equity contracts as far as we're concerned, so they fall under that bracket. Footage, film, stock shots, sports rights, we lump those together, and other rights, so databases, directors, choreography, and even recipes are classed as copyright works in some cases. I'm not sure whether I'd agree with Delia Smith's How to Boil an Egg, but we'll pass judgment on that one. We deal with various bodies, so all these are representative bodies of these artistic and literary and dramatic and musical works. And the BBC has framework agreements with most, if not all of these, where we agree certain terms and uses with these bodies. And as I said at the beginning, it's always good to try and get advice from these people because they know what the terms are, and they can also advise you on rates and try and help you not setting unhelpful precedents. So, very quickly, I'm going to just go through the 4 different types of how we contract copyright holders and performers. We have all rights agreements, we have collective agreements, we have collective licenses, and we have agreed standard terms where possible. Sometimes we do bespoke agreements, but we try not to do that because that stores up problems for the future, particularly when you start looking back at the archive and you have to dig out that bespoke contract and assess whether you have those rights. So an all rights model is a comprehensive rights grant where we're able to do anything we like with the material within reason. And of course, the BBC tries to act responsibly in with what we do with material. Some of these are actually under staff contracts. So the BBC orchestras, for example, are all under staff. Employees, TV and radio presenters, and what we call talks contributors, where people come in and are interviewed or are guests on programs. They tend to be on an all rights basis. We have collective agreements where we determine, as I mentioned before, with the framework body, the representative body, we determine the rights granted and the payment models depending on the subsequent uses of the material we make. And that can cover actors, scriptwriters, freelance musicians. And usually, in that instance, we can apply retrospectively the terms. So, for example, with equity, we can agree something with equity, and that then applies collectively going back with all those members. So it's a very useful model for us. And we don't have to keep digging out old contracts. Collective licensing, or blanket licensing, that's also sometimes called, is where we have a big collective license, and this is what we have with the music industry, where we write a check once a year, we report our use to that body, and they disseminate the monies amongst their members. Again, that's very helpful for the BBC, because as long as we report those 200,000 items of music every week, we're able to use it, and we agree the terms in which we're able to use that music. We also have an agreement with the directors on this basis. And lastly, standard terms agreements where possible. So we have in place standard terms agreements for artistic works, photographs, published material with the Publishers Association and Society of Authors, for example, and also film sequences. We have our own license agreement, which we try and put in place. It does avoid the need for individual negotiations. However, it does mean a lot of administration because we can't retrospectively apply that all the time. So, as I said, with the archive issues, that's more work for us. So those are the 4 up front for new works. So, just coming on to, well, what's the process we go through of checking rights when we look at material that we want to use? What we always do is start with the programme rights. So who actually owns the programme itself? Is it the BBC? Is it an independent company? Is it a distributor who's swept up all the rights? That's the first question. Before we start looking at who's in the programme, we always start with the programme rights on that basis. We also look at whether that's commercially exploited currently to start seeing and assessing whether there's going to be some issues or arguments why they wouldn't grant us those rights. So is it currently on Amazon for sale? Is it on DVD? Is it sold abroad? Is it sold in the UK? We ask all those questions. Are there distribution rights under license, whether that's with Worldwide, BBC Worldwide? Is it with some other distributor who's got a certain amount of period of time to exploit those rights? That's another question. And under this bracket, we also say, is there any acquired film in that material? Because that can lead into a whole raft of different processes, because each piece of audiovisual content can include all those contributors that I've been through earlier on. And then when you move on to contributor rights, so once you've got the program rights sorted out, you move on to contributor rights, and that can involve all those people I've said. The older the material, the increased the risk. The risk goes up. Because of the old paperwork, we can't find contracts. 10, 15 years ago, we didn't even have online rights, as far as I know, well, 20 years ago maybe, or on-demand rights. So we're not going to be in that position. We know that, but it's where you may find that they've been bought out, all rights, and you don't have any further work to do. But that does ramp up the administration, and it ramps up the time that you'll need to clear rights. However, don't assume that it's all going to be difficult. I'm not here to kind of say it's all doom and gloom and rights is a horrible thing to get into. It's not. And you can actually find your way through it, and some rights have already been acquired, or you just need to pay something. So please don't go away with the impression that it's all horrible. And as I said, seek advice from respected organisations. So basic questions. Start with the basic. What do you want to use? What actual work is required? What copyright work is there in what you want to use? What use is to be made of it? Where's it going to go? Where will it be accessed? Is it online? Is it a radio? Is it a phone? Is it an app? Is it, you name it, you've got to decide. And is it going to be free or pay? That's quite a critical thing to decide up front. But you quickly move on, particularly in the online space, you quickly move on to other more tricky questions. So is it live broadcast, or is it making available where someone can go and watch it or access it as and when they want to? Is it streamed or downloadable? If it's downloadable, is it protected with digital rights management so that it's downloadable just for a certain period of time and then it goes up in a puff of smoke? Or is it permanently downloadable where someone can keep it and go off and do what they like with it? Temporary or permanent? Public service free or commercial? If commercial, what type of exploitation? So you can see the kind of questions we straight away get into when somebody comes and asks us to clear the rights. Is it a closed environment or is it open? If open, UK only or global? And some of the rights and the exceptions are UK only. So fair dealing, we would advise that fair dealing is only in the UK. There's similar provisions abroad, but you shouldn't rely on them. Therefore, you should actually clear it if you're going to go global. And lastly, but not least, is the user going to be able to manipulate or reuse the content? And that is something that rights holders, we did a pilot in 2005 called the Creative Archive Pilot, which essentially offered online BBC archive content for people to manipulate, re-edit. And that was probably the most challenging rights project I've ever done from a rights holder's point of view. But we got there with some content. The other thing to say on that is that some rights holders are very, very open to that kind of use, and others are completely down the other end of the spectrum and very resistant and protective of their rights. And you should be aware of that. So, all in all, it's complex. And it's like layers of onions where you start peeling away the onions. And as someone else said when I showed that slide, they said, yes, but it also makes you cry as well. So, very good. So, just a quick bit of advice and kind of helpful advice. When you start looking at use of archive, from our perspective, we try and advise people the rights light areas, if you like. So where are the areas where you won't get snared and snagged up in complex rights issues? Well, we've got quite a big stock shots or stock film library where it's just general general scenery, general landscapes, buildings, etc. And there's a lot of good stuff in there that we can draw on that's got no rights holders whatsoever. Local news is often all rights. General events and observational documentaries where everybody has signed up kind of release forms and the presenters on all rights, etc. You've still got music in some of those programs which you need to look at, and also with those kinds of programs you have to be very responsible with your duty of care to contributors. So that's more a kind of editorial policy issue where you have to be very sensible about members of the public, some of them from the deep archive who might not want to be known as that person who was convicted for drunk driving or rape, or there might be some tricky subject areas to deal with, and you've got to act responsibly. And then the rights-heavy areas. So drama and comedy. Dramas, battle scenes, orchestras, they can involve hundreds of contributors. Documentaries, because they're stuffed full of, particularly the history documentaries, stuffed full of acquired film, stills, artworks, ditto arts and culture, some of which may have been cleared under fair dealing originally, but if you want to reuse them, that might not always apply, so you need to be careful there. And music performances, so pop and classical, particularly where you've got signed artists, what we call signed artists who are with the major record labels, and you're doing a retrospective about that particular artist. I'll be very interested in hearing a bit later about the John Peel archive, because I know they found a pretty neat way of getting music onto the site, which I was really impressed with, and I'm looking forward to the sessions later on. Just a quick demonstration. I can't do a BBC presentation without mentioning Doctor Who, really, can I? This was a slide done a little while ago now to demonstrate how many contributors are in an average episode of Doctor Who. And so it was broken down into all those areas, and as you can see, there's a significant amount of contributors just in an average episode. Even down to who owns different monsters in Doctor Who. And the Daleks famously are owned by Terry Nation, the estate of Terry Nation, and the BBC. We share the ownership of that. But it can get very complicated. And then when you move on to how you exploit Doctor Who, that gets even more complicated, because some rights are cleared up front, some we just pay, and some we have to go back and negotiate. And that just demonstrates, depending on what you want to do with it, who we have to go and contact. And that's why there's 200 people plus in Rights and Business Affairs and clearing secondary rights. We're trying to make this a lot simpler, by the way. This hasn't passed us by that this is really complicated, and we've actually just come to the end of a 3-year project or initiative called Project 2, which is just a quick aside, is called Project Touch Once Only, and that's all about how we can stop picking that contract up time and time again, depending on what type of use people make of it, and program makers and worldwide make of our programs. And that's all about getting certainty up front about whatever we want to do from a public service or possibly commercial basis, how we can get to the position where we agree a model or have the mechanism to clear new uses up front with the representative body, so that we don't end up putting millions of pounds of the license fee into kind of rights reclearance and picking up those contracts about 70 different times. Because that's what we do. That's the trouble with rights. So, lastly, areas to avoid. And this is something just from our own practical experience, really. So sports clips are incredibly expensive, for one thing, and very complicated, and you have to go to the sports body to get the clearance. Even though the BBC owns the footage of our 1948 Olympics, we actually have to go to the IOC and clear the rights for the sport itself. Similarly with football, boxing, tennis, you name it. So that can add a layer of complexity and expense, and they are very litigious as well. And they will come after you if you've used your sports clip and put a hefty fine on you. Historical docs, I mentioned that already. Acquired programming, well, that's not the BBC's, but essentially, you know, if you want to go and use a clip of Mad Men or a feature film, Hollywood feature film, you're looking at getting your checkbook out in a serious way. Thousands of dollars per minute. And last but not least, royal events. We have to have some sensitivity there about royal events, not because of the Queen's Gate scandal a few years ago, but generally we have to be aware of the palace and royal events featuring the royals. Just a quick note on crediting. Copyright holders, as I said before, unless they waive these rights, they have the moral right to be identified as the author of the work or the creator. So you should bear that in mind. YouTube or Twitter aren't the authors. The people who make the footage, stills or text, are the authors. There are, as some of you know, Creative Commons type licenses or Creative Commons licenses where accreditation is actually the only requirement. And you may have spotted, there's been a couple of photographs I've used which have been used under the Creative Commons license, and I've credited their name underneath. But that's fine. So it's just essentially making sure you credit the right people, and they'll usually be happy, actually. So, just to wrap up, common clearance issues. So, if somebody was coming to me saying, well, what do I do with rights? You know, where do I start? Well, I say, first thing is, give yourself plenty of time. Don't run out of time. You can deliver fantastic, great projects and products when you give yourself adequate research time, contracting time, and clearance time when you're doing your planning. And just don't run out of time. It's always best to agree the uses and stick to them, or you build a kind of clear phased approach of where you want to go with your project, rather than scope creep, as I call it, where you go, oh, actually, we want to do this now, or we want to do that, or we go that way and that way. And it makes it a complete nightmare for the person negotiating the rights, because you've actually then got to go back and renegotiate certain different rights with the rights holder, unless you've bought out all rights. So try and nail down what you need to do up front. Budget appropriately, not only for the rights payments, and as I've said, some of them are really expensive, but also including the underwriting the risk if you can't find people, or an await claim fund, as we call it. So you've made strenuous efforts to find a rights holder, you can't find them, just put some money aside to make sure that if they put their hand up and come out of the woodwork, you can pay them. But also, importantly, the clearance resource. So finding somebody that can do the clearance for you. And that was it. Find a rights expert if you can. There are a number of freelancers out there. There's one in the room already. Fiona Nurberg over there, who's ex-BBC. And there are people out there who are rights experts who are kind of can be subcontracted, or lawyers. Prioritize the material and have backups. If material is unclearable or too costly, because it can be sometimes, then editing costs need to be factored in. And I would argue it's important to have clear management of the project. So who makes that final decision of what's in or what's out in terms of the copyright work in your project? And lastly, if you're serving program material, including music, so for example, if you're serving it online, you will need a license from the music collecting societies to either broadcast or make available content. But they will help you on that. They're readily set up to help you on getting those licenses. So, very practical, I hope, and a quick whizzle stop through.
Thank you, Ben. That's great. There we go. Round of applause. So I'll come out for questions as soon as you have any. I'll start with one. So lots of that applies clearly mainly to archive, or you focused on archive. What if I'm sort of one step upstream? What if I'm, say, a performing arts organisation and I've got to get in a position where the work coming off my stage can be used? Is it very different, or are there common themes and issues?
Do you mean used online?
Yeah, used online.
That's a good question. I would argue that equity probably advise,
Right.
in terms of performers' rights of live events online. I know the National Theatre, for example, have an agreement in place with the Writers Guild and Equity for beaming their live plays to cinemas around the globe. So, there are some people very, forward-looking and are doing those deals with those rights organisations.
Right. So your advice would be go and ask somebody who's done it already?
Correct. Well, if you can.
If you can.
Unless you're the first person doing it.
Which you're usually not. Sometimes I suppose you are.
Yeah.
Any particular questions out there? If you do the usual thing, tell us who you are and where you come from. I think there's a mic just coming in from behind you. Thank you.
Sebastian Scotney, and I edit the London Jazz site. I was just really interested in the concept of fair dealing and to know if that's been elaborated or if there is, if there's a source material somewhere for what fair dealing consists of. It was a new concept to me.
Okay. I've spoken to Linda Coburn about the Arts Council actually getting the link on their site to the IPO, the Intellectual Property Office. I was having a look at their site over the last few days in preparation for this, and they do offer a fantastic site about intellectual property, what copyright is, what fair dealing is, and they've got really good guides there about everything I've touched on. And I would heartily recommend going to see it. They also give you an update on where the legislative process has got to. So the Hargreaves report, where Richard Hooper's got to on his consultation about the digital copyright exchange, which is being looked at. So all of it's up there, and where the government have got to in terms of their thinking. So I would heartily recommend that site.
The core notion of fair dealing is about not restricting people's ability to have the sort of culture's ability to have a conversation about copyright works, isn't it, effectively?
Yes, so I mentioned criticism and review, and the other one is reporting a current event. So news, you rely on fair dealing a lot, where you can use a piece of the copyright work. If, say, for example, you're reporting on the death of an artist or a creator or a writer, you can show a piece of their work under that exception to the Copyright Act.
Okay, great. Jen, here.
Timon from Project Pressure. So let's say if you're doing a crowdsourced project and you're crowdsourcing your content, which is a thing that both the Arts Council and some of these seminars have been dealing with, who's ultimately responsible for the legality, the right clearance of that content? Is that the crowd, as in that individual uploading a picture or participating, or is it you as an organisation? And any advice on going about that? Because that's adding an extra layer to this already complex issue.
Okay.
Sure. Okay. I would argue that as an arts organisation, you should be getting advice on an agreement that they would accept when they were submitting content. I would also try and act responsibly in terms of making them aware that they need to clear underlying rights that I've been through. So if they're using music, they should go and get the clearance before they post it up to you. It's an interesting one because the rights holder may decide, well, I'm actually going to contact the arts organisation first because they're the bigger entity, rather than try and find an individual who's breached my rights. So, we find that often. Whether they come to the BBC first because they know where we are and they can find us, rather than the user who may have posted something up online.
Yeah.
So in terms of use, act responsibly in terms of advising people. Just, if you're doing something in your living room and you're posting a blog up online or something on, you filmed, then make sure that the music's not on in the background with a commercial sound recording, because we might not be able to use it.
I suppose the key, one of the things you said earlier was do it at the beginning. Don't put it up there and assume it'll be okay.
Correct.
Even more the case in this sort of area?
Yes, and also, hopefully this kind of session will make people more familiar with what to look out for. And as an organisation, you should be have this in the back of your mind and go, actually, we can't use that bit because there's a television in the background with a piece of the World Cup in, and we know that if somebody spots that, they might come after us.
Isn't there a famous example of a documentary of one of the American orchestras where they eventually couldn't air the documentary because in the back of the pit somebody, a percussionist, was watching The Simpsons and it was caught in shot. I don't think that's made up.
That might be very well the case.
And they wanted, N tens of $1,000s to clear a little bit of The Simpsons, which is in the back of the shot. Another gent here.
Tom Morgan from the National Portrait Gallery. As you rightly say, people do come to the BBC first, and in terms of people who are putting together these projects and doing rights clearances, your advice is to go to somebody who's done it before. You've done it before, and I wonder. I mean, this is a very useful event, and the work of the Academy is very useful. But I wonder whether you also actually make some elements of your contracting kind of available as templates, or even some of your processes available as templates for other arts organisations.
Yes, no, that's a very good point, Tom, actually, and we've recently, the BBC is fantastic, and that's why I love working here so much, is because we are so forward-thinking, and we just signed an agreement with the Writers Guild and Personal Managers Association a couple of weeks ago, which is going to completely transform writers contracting, where they are setting up a collective body themselves, and we can license collectively with writers now, right. And hopefully we can start pushing that model out to a wider field. The other thing we do, which is a very good thing we do, is for independent productions, we have something called Fast Clear for music, where they can use our online clearance system for music, where as long as they're using a certain type of music and a certain label, and it's not part of the main signature tune of the series, they're not doing parody, they're not doing reversions of it where they sing different lyrics. They can use it under our blanket license, and it's automatically reported through online to the collecting societies. So what I'd like to see is something similar where we can open up the technology to kind of do really quick rights clearances, where the information gets through to the rights holders or their representative bodies, but it can all be done automatically, 24/7. It's not kind of waiting for the phone on the Monday morning to pick the phone up to someone to then go and get permission. It's like, as long as you're doing this, you're free to use it.
I should probably know this. Was that done for the space, or could it have been done for the space? I don't think it was.
It's slightly different. Yeah,
different.
I think that's a slightly different model.
But maybe down the line. Okay, we've got time for one more.
Sorry.
Do you want to follow up? Quick one, yeah.
It sounds like the BBC is sort of potentially claiming some space around the general concept of the digital copyright exchange in facilitating these kinds of licensing activities.
I'm not sure whether we're doing a kind of land grab on the digital copyright exchange, to be honest. I think we've got enough to do as it is, but we're certainly feeding into Richard Hooper and sharing some of the issues and some of the problems we have, actually. So, yeah.
I'm one of Hooper's 12 advisors. I haven't noticed them land grabbing, but maybe I wasn't at the right meeting.
Land grabbing wasn't what was.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
it's actually helpful.
Maybe I inferred from that.
What about and certainly when we started in my commercial life doing lots of things for online, we looked at PACT, at the Producers Alliance for Cinema and Television, and standard contracts that had existed there, because they at least have the right bits in, even if the amount of money involved is sort of screwy.
Yes.
Is that
again
wrong?
Again, the BBC, has framework agreements in place with all those bodies I went through and more. We have about 70 different agreements. They are probably up online with those bodies. The Writers Guild publish their agreements with the BBC, so you can quite freely go and see what the terms are that the BBC negotiates with those bodies, and get some guidance that way.
Okay, we've got time for one more. I think just here.
My name's Natasha. I run a company called CreatorBot. I represent a lot of independent artists.
Hi, Natasha.
And I was just wondering, you spoke about how it can cost thousands of pounds just to run a short clip of a film. I was wondering how that works when it comes to like indie films and showing clips from indie films, and whether the money for the rights goes to the independent company with that, or whether that's something that because they're being given promotion, the BBC don't pay for.
There's a sort of point of principle and there's a point of negotiation in that, really, is there?
That's a very good question. I guess it depends whether the independent filmmakers signed up with a distributor, whether they've got some sort of license, an agency agreement with a big film library. That might be the case. So you'd have to find that out first, and whether it goes through an agency. If not, direct, I guess.
I was just wondering, in regards to like when obviously artists or creators need promotion, how often is it that rights are given for free to the BBC?
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
That's a slightly different question, but interesting, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was saying to someone at lunchtime that, often you find that when artists or creators are starting out, they're very keen to get their work out there to make their name and build their career, and they're perfectly willing to give stuff away promotionally and freely just to get their name out there. Interestingly, though, when they start getting up the kind of career ladder, their agents advise, or they start saying, actually, yes, I'm actually starting to make quite a good living out of this, and I actually want to protect my rights slightly more. So you get into an interesting situation. However, there are some very big names out there who actively give stuff away for promotional purposes. And I was talking to one agent of a comedy agent recently who was saying that her clients are usually in one camp or the other. They're either very restrictive, lock down rights, don't allow people to use it and put it up online, and then there's the other extreme where big names are giving away promotional clips of some of their performances to start a viral marketing campaign online, and that then drives live performances in different territories. So she was saying that X name is fantastically big in Russia, and they're all clamouring for this person to come over and do a live tour, which is where the money is. The live performances are where the money is now. So that's a very good example of where even when you're a big name, you can still drive promotional use.
Okay, great. I'm sure there are lots of other questions, but in the interest of staying on time,
sure, same time.
I'd say thank you very much to Ben for a really informative session there. He's around if he wants to pick his brain. Thank you, Ben.